Life doesn't give you much when you're a San Diego fan. We've got the 84 World Series lost, the 98 World Series lost, the 94 Super Bowl lost that doesn't even count anymore because it was done by that lightning bolt team whose name we don't mention on this program. San Diego is famously known as the biggest city in America never to win a major sports championship. We've had 3 NBA teams and 1 NFL team leave town. We've never had an NHL team or a decent rink for them to play in, even if we did. But what we've lacked in keeping teams and winning games that matter, we've been compensated for in other ways. We got to have Dan Fouts for his entire career. We got to have Don Coryell first with the Aztecs and later with the Lightning Bolt team, whose name we don't mention on this program. And we got to have 20 years of the right fielder, number 19, Anthony Keith Gwynn. And I really do miss Tony today. But he is an easy man to miss, because he would have been over the freaking moon about the Aztecs being in the Final Four. Oh, what, you don't associate the name Tony Gwynn with the game of basketball? Well, you ought to, and here is why. This man was a first-round NBA draft pick, after all, as a 5'10" point guard, no less, was probably one of the 3 best point guards in the country in 1979. And if you look at San Diego State's all-time stat leaderboards, even with all the great players they have had in this century, you will still see a whole lot of Tony Gwynn's name on those lists, including in the number 1 spot on the career assists list, and by a fairly wide margin. He would have been absolutely tickled to death about all of this, and I so badly wish he was here to see it. When the Aztecs basketball team did well, he enjoyed it more than he ever enjoyed his own considerable exploits on the baseball field, including the .338 lifetime average, 8 batting titles, 3,141 hits, 5 gold gloves, and first ballot Hall of Fame selection. If you're not from here and you don't know the history, it's really impossible to overstate how bad the Aztecs basketball program was when Steve Fisher and Brian Dutcher first arrived here in '99. There were 306 teams in Division I college basketball at the time, and nobody didn't agree that the Aztecs were one of the teams on the wrong side of number 300. They actually were playing their home games in their practice gymnasium at that point, a venue with under 400 seats, because they were selling so few tickets at the San Diego Sports Arena, they couldn't even cover the cost of their rent. They won 4 games that first year and went winless in the conference. I heard a guy on a radio call-in show today saying that during the off-season between the first year and the second year, he went to a Meet the Coach event with Steve Fisher, and a grand total of 8 other people showed up. It was the 5th year before they made the NCAAs. It was the 8th year before they made back-to-back tournaments. The 11th year before they won a game. But it was that 11th year that put them on the national map when they won their first 20 in a row to start the season and got all the way up to number 4 in the country before losing a couple of games to Jimmer Fredette and BYU. They reached their first of 2 Sweet 16s that year. The other was in 2014 behind a front line of Kawhi Leonard, Billy White, and Malcolm Thomas, before losing to the eventual national champions UConn in a game they absolutely should have won, and which I prefer still not to think about. But it's the 2020 season that still sticks in the collective craw around here more than any other. It was Dutcher's 3rd year as head coach after Fisher had retired. It's either the second or possibly best team in program history. They're 30-2. They're top 10 in the poll all season. They're in line for a number 1 seed in the tournament, maybe even the number 1 overall seed. And the freaking season gets canceled over the stupid China virus the day before Selection Sunday. So I thought it was really touching and appropriate in the post-game news conference after yesterday's victory that the guys who were still around from that team dedicated this Final Four to the guys who were upperclassmen on the 2020 team and never got a chance to play in the tournament. And it's well done, boys. Now go and win the whole thing, why don't you? You come home with a national championship, I'm going to tell you right now, this town is going to freaking explode. Jim Eagle, hit the Aztec fight song, please. From high high atop the battlements of Montezuma Mesa, where we rip out more beating hearts by 9 a.m. than most pre-Columbian empires do all day. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all Aztecs at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And I'm going to open tonight with a question that I want you to ponder briefly. What happens when you've got a good director and a good crew and a good story and a good script, but none of the main actors want to be in the picture and they all look like they're completely miserable? The answer is, you get a picture that looks a lot like 1978's Force 10 from Navarone, starring Robert Shaw, Harrison Ford, Carl Weathers, history's greatest San Diego State Aztec, not named Tony Gwynn, and Barbara Bach, or Lady Starkey, as she is now, by virtue of the fact that her husband Ringo is now Sir Richard Starkey, Knight Bachelor of His Majesty's realm. Even though 20 years ago he recorded a song whose express purpose was to guarantee that he never would get a knighthood, but nothing makes sense in the world anymore anyway, so what the hell do you do? And Barbara Bach is the first thing we need to talk about here, so I'm just going to come out and say this as plainly as I can. The last time I saw a female lead get punched in the face this many times was probably $1 Million Baby. Barbara Bach gets the ever-loving shit beat out of her in this flick, and I guess the most twisted irony of all is that the only guy who doesn't punch her in the face is Apollo Creed. I don't make the news, folks, I just report it. And in fairness, it does have to be noted that the first beating is administered at her own request. You see, our heroes are on a secret mission into Nazi-occupied Yugoslavia, and they're supposed to hook up with the good partisans who were working with the Russians, but instead they get duped and captured by the bad partisans who are working with the Germans. But then Barbara Bach, or Lady Starkey as she is now, switches sides for the first of 17 times in the movie and reveals that she's actually working with the good partisans that our heroes are here and supposed to hook up with. And then she's like, look, I just killed these 3 motherfuckers and now I'm letting you guys go, so you need to at least beat the shit out of me so it's more believable when I go back and tell them that you overpowered us and escaped. Harrison Ford is not very much into this idea, much like everything else in this picture. I swear there are times he looks so miserable you half expect him to turn to the camera and say, why am I in this picture again? So he gives her a sort of a little half-hearted jab in the nose, but that just pisses her off, and she defies him to punch her like a fucking man. He then turns and leaves. Now, whether that was in the script or he just got bored with the scene and decided to go grab a coffee remains unconfirmed. But have no fear, because Robert Shaw decides, well, if this lady wants to be properly punched, I suppose it's my chivalrous duty to oblige her, and he lays into her with a textbook right cross that nearly puts her flat on the deck. This was the last picture that Robert Shaw ever completed. He didn't want to do it, was talked into doing it by his agent, and spent the whole production writing sad letters home to his wife saying how miserable he was and how this was going to be his last ever acting job. The movie was still a month away from being released when, on the way home from dinner one night, he stopped the car, got out complaining about that he couldn't breathe, and promptly dropped stone dead from a massive fatal heart attack at the age of 51. For Harrison Ford, this was the very next thing he did after Star Wars, which I refuse to call A New Hope, and if that offends you, good. But see, when principal photography wrapped on Star Wars, the last thing Harrison Ford thought was that this was going to be the most popular movie of all time and make him into an instant global superstar. So in his mind, Han Solo was going to just be some dorky role that he played early in his career that he would have to spend the rest of his life living down, if anything. Hey, aren't you the guy with the 7-foot talking dog? That's how he figured the rest of his career was probably going to go. If he was even going to have an acting career, he's still only a few years removed at this point from being a set carpenter. He could wind up back with a saw in his hand pretty easy if things don't go right. Or so he's still thinking when he signs on for this picture in the first part of 1977. He thinks, well, let's do something that's as far away from sci-fi as possible. There's always a future in war pictures. A lot of guys have made comfortable careers out of playing military characters, so I think that's the rational thing for me to do at this point in my life. And knowing what he knew when he made that call, it is difficult to fault him for his reasoning. But then Star Wars comes out in May, It turns into a phenomenon that is totally unprecedented in the history of popular culture, and by the fall, if you're Harrison Ford, you're thinking, God damn it, and now I can do whatever I want, whenever I want for the rest of my life, but I agreed to go shoot that stupid war movie in Yugoslavia, and I can't get out of it, so fuck. Meanwhile, Carl Weathers is in a slightly different position, career-wise. It's been 2 full years since Rocky came out. It's a gigantic hit. It's an Oscar winner. And Apollo Creed is already an American icon, because of course he is. Brief digression. I was thinking today when I was listening to some professional race huckster whining about what a racist country we are, about how back in the mid-'80s, when me and the other 9 and 10-year-old white boy kids would have fictional boxing matches out on the playground. Every single one of us wanted to be Apollo Creed and not Rocky, because Apollo Creed is the baddest man alive. And also, maybe it's worth noting that in that same racist country at that same racist time, Bill Cosby was America's TV dad, and Michael Jackson was history's most successful recording artist, and Magic Johnson was on pretty much every other TV commercial. So racist, so shameful, no different from Reconstruction. Let the reparations flow, I say. Now back to Carl Weathers, number 44, outside linebacker, history's greatest San Diego State Aztec not named Tony Gwynn, defensive MVP of an unbeaten team in 1969. He knows there's going to be a Rocky 2. He's already signed on for the thing. He's getting himself a gigantic pay raise, but he's also thinking a different version of the same thing Harrison Ford's thinking at this point. I need to demonstrate the ability to play some different kinds of roles, otherwise I might get over-identified with one character and be shit out of luck after the Apollo Creed thing ends. But I think he realized pretty quickly that Force 10 from Navarone was probably a mistake. It's easy to see why he was offered the role, because he was a recognizable face coming off of a very well-received performance. The picture will do better business just by having his picture on the poster. The problem is that the role is just not a good fit for the actor. Carl Weathers is an articulate, educated man, but here he's being asked to play a criminal street tough from Harlem who escaped from the stockade and stowed away on the plane carrying our heroes from Greece to Yugoslavia, and it just doesn't work. And one gets the impression that he knows it doesn't work. It's hard not to laugh any time Ford and Weathers are on screen at the same time, because you've never seen 2 actors who wanted less to be where they are doing what they're doing. Meanwhile, do you remember Richard Kiel? He was also at the high point of his career in 1978. He was in the midst of playing Jaws in, 3 or 4 of the James Bond movies consecutively. He's in this one too, playing the leader of one of the gangs of partisans, and he gets the honor of being the next guy to beat the shit out of Ringo's wife. And I guess I should give the background on that whole thing too, since I've mentioned Ringo so many times, or Sir Richard as he is now. This picture gets made 3 years before the two of them had first met and kindled their romantic association on the set of the 1981 cinematic classic Caveman, which is another picture that may potentially warrant its own comedy review one of these days. Who knows? Now, why was it that Ringo Starr and Barbara Bach wound up co-starring in a film that has hardly any dialogue, and the dialogue it does have is mostly nonsense gibberish sounds? Well, in Ringo's case, it's because he wasn't a very good actor, and he was doing Hunter Biden levels of cocaine at the time, so he couldn't be relied on for remembering all that many long speaking passages. For Barbara Bach, she winds up there because she's been typecast as a European actress who can't speak unaccented English, which must have come as quite a shock to her since she was born and raised in New York City. You see, casting directors thought, correctly, that she had a very nice exotic look about her, and she could play any number of nationalities, which she proceeded to do in a whole succession of films, one of which was Force 10 from Navarone, and she did her European accent so convincingly that everybody in the industry started assuming she really was European. So nobody ever called with American roles for her to play. Her agent has no idea it was happening until she gets a call one day saying, yeah, can your girl play American? And she says, well, she's from Brooklyn, so I should hope so. And on the strength of that misunderstanding, Barbara Bach winds up as the female lead in Caveman opposite her future husband. And in a world where there aren't many long-term happy marriages, Sir Richard and Lady Starkey have had one for 42 years and still going strong by all accounts, which just goes to show that sometimes professional setbacks can produce the happiest accidents of them all. But I cannot imagine that Ringo, when he gets a hankering to sit down and watch one of Lady Starkey's old films, I don't think he ever reaches for the DVD of Force 10 from Navarone because, and this is just me, but I wouldn't want to spend 2 hours watching other dudes beat the shit out of my wife before ultimately killing her after her 17th heel turn of the picture. And the scene with Richard Kiel, I actually found it kind of troubling. That dude is smacking the shit out of her, bouncing her off the wall by her neck, and it's all one continuous shot. There's no stunt doubles, there's no quick cuts, there's none of the usual filmmaking tricks that you use to make something seem more violent than it really is. And this got me to thinking. This movie showed up in my YouTube recommendations, and for all the various advisories that YouTube puts on things, I might have expected one here, and I think it might not have been unreasonable. Warning: the following video contains lots of guys punching Ringo Starr's wife in the face. Viewer discretion advised. I mean, you can't even say the name of the great communist Chinese Wuhan Kung Flu coronavirus of 2019 without getting the blue banner of death on your video. You can't question the veracity of the 2020 election without getting black bagged and shipped to Gitmo in the middle of the night. But Lady Starkey's face getting used for a punching bag by 5 different dudes doesn't warrant any sort of advisory? There's some pretty strange priorities there, is all I'm saying. And you know how sometimes you feel like you've seen a movie before, but you watch it and you don't have the faintest recollection of anything? That's how this picture was for me. So I've spent the day trying to reconstruct where and why I would have seen it before. And I think I probably rented it from the video store one time, almost certainly because it had Indiana Jones and Apollo Creed's pictures on the box. For 10-year-old me, Harrison Ford and Carl Weathers in the same picture would have been just about the greatest sounding thing ever. But it's weird, the whole men punching women thing, because in current day cinema, practically every picture features some 97-pound girl boss heroine defeating half a dozen hulking male assassins in hand-to-hand combat. But you will notice, the 97-pound girl boss heroine never actually takes a punch. The punches are always slipped or blocked or parried. In one of those fights, if the male opponent actually landed a punch clean in the face of the 97-pound girl boss heroine, the whole audience would gasp out loud. It would seem shocking and unacceptable. The woke Twitter rage mob wouldn't shut up about it for 2 weeks, probably. So men engaging in violence against women is perfectly acceptable as long as the woman takes no damage and easily wins the fight. But no current-day mainstream filmmaker would ever dream of depicting the sort of situations in which violence against women actually takes place in the real world, because that would require an acknowledgement, at least a tacit one, of the reality that men are bigger and stronger than women and thus physically capable of using violence to elicit a desired response. But it's uncomfortable talking about such things, so let's just get back to our delusional make-believe fantasy world where the 97-pound girl boss heroine always emerges victorious and unscathed after doing battle with the forces of toxic masculinity. And for Christ's sake, will somebody go down to Harrison Ford's trailer and take away his belt and his shoelaces, because that guy really doesn't look like he wants to be here. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Don't punch anybody's wife in the face tonight, including your own. See you next time. Have a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.